Welcome to World History with Mr. Giese. In this episode, we will be discussing what life was like during the Industrial Revolution. We will be answering the following questions. How was production organized before factories? What were factories and factory towns like? How did the factory system affect workers? What was mass production and what were its effects? As we began discussing in the previous video, cottage industries were what was present before industrialization existed. What the cottage industry was, when discussing the textile industry, was working out of the home. Families could take the raw materials and then take them through the many stages to make a finished product. As you can imagine, family life revolved primarily around the amount of work they needed to complete. Therefore, families could work as they deemed necessary. If they needed more money, they would work harder and longer to finish more products. Some problems with the cottage industry were if anything happened to the home, like a fire or flood, this could destroy the equipment and any finished product that they had. This would ruin a family's life. And with all the different stages being completed in the home, all the skills had to be perfected by one or a few people, and this could take several years to master. As countries became more industrialized, people did not work out of their homes. The biggest reason was they could not compete with the factories. What factories did was separate all of the different tasks or stages into different jobs. As people only had to perfect one system, the overall production time decreased. By spending less time on the product, there was a smaller cost of producing goods. This allowed large companies to sell their products for a cheaper price. Workers were mostly men, but children were able to work in the factories as well. A benefit of hiring children was that they could pay them a lower wage because they were not viewed as being the primary wage earner. All this being said, factories offered poor conditions. Children that worked in factories often did so because of their size, but even then they would have to work hours bent over, inhaling harmful chemicals that would impact them for the rest of their life. And if you thought, well, I could do that for 8 hours, think again. Most were working at least 12 hours, if not more. Employees of factories were not only impacted at work, but outside of the factory as well. Since they were working such long hours, they had to live close to the factory. As coal became the main source of fuel for factories, whole towns would be covered in thick soot and sulfur and other poisonous chemicals that were released into the air. Western England emitted so much pollution into the air that the area was nicknamed the Black Country, and visitors would even describe it as being black by day and red by night as the fires were being burned to create iron. The factory system created a hierarchy of people involved with any factory. First, you had the wealthy investors that invested and owned the factories. They did very little of the work, but they invested the money. Second, you had the mid-level supervisors that actually ran the factories and supervised the day-to-day operations. And finally, at the bottom, were the low-level workers that actually ran the machines. Since low-level workers required very little education, there were many available for factories to find due to the enclosure movement. Factories like to try to employ women or children because they didn't expect higher wages. Factory jobs came to be considered women's work due to the very little skill needed. Side note, don't email me or comment below because of the previous statement. I don't believe this. I was just informing you of some facts, not my personal beliefs. Alright, where was I? The industrialization that we have been discussing was not welcomed with open arms by everyone. Some weavers and other cottage industry workers were still trying to compete with the factories, but were falling behind due to the undercutting of their prices. Some looked to violence to try to protest the unfairness that the factories caused to their well-being. Factory workers began to form their first labor unions and started protesting against factories on behalf of the workers and working conditions in factories. This slowly brought change in the form of Parliament stepping in and legalizing labor unions. As factories became more popular, the need for more people to work in the factories created a larger middle class. One of the things that factories used was mass production, and that's where factories were able to produce more products more efficiently. But how did they do it? If a factory is making large amounts of the same product, then they could speed up their processes. Using interchangeable parts or identical machine-made parts, factories could produce and repair more efficiently. Before, you would have one person manufacturing each part individually. This would take time, not only initially to create the product, but also to repair something that did not have a part already made. By making each part interchangeable, one worker could put together many identical products in a shorter amount of time. Then when you put each worker with one assigned job in the process of creating a product, you create an assembly line. This cut down on the time that it took to train a person to create a whole project by just making them create one piece of the process. At the beginning of this process is an indistinguishable product, but by everyone doing their job one piece at a time, at the end emerges a finished product in a minimal amount of time. This did allow for a larger amount of goods to be available to the public and for a lower price. But the jobs did become very repetitive and tedious. Just imagine if you only wrote one letter of an essay all day long. As I'm saying this, I imagine that some of you would rather do that than the whole essay, so my example wasn't very good. How about you just agree with me this time around and I'll do better next time. In the next video, we'll try to take a look at some of the new ideas that emerged in an industrialized society and then try to make sense of everything that is going on around them.